Hi there, and welcome to The Daily Gardener, a podcast about gardening, botanical history, and literature. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and today is June 1st, and there are just 19 days until the first day of summer. Today we celebrate a gardener who transformed and developed the Cambridge Botanic Garden. We'll also learn about a writer and a gardener who won a Pulitzer for her writing and praise for her work in garden design. We'll hear an excerpt about the first day of June, and we grow that garden library today with a book about houseplants featuring projects, profiles, and guidance. And then we'll wrap things up with the story of a world-famous writer and her personal paradise on an Australian island. But first, here's today's curated news. Well, today's curated news is a great reminder to all of us to go and visit our nearest botanic garden. This is a post that was written by Christy McGowan, and what Christy did is she took her darling family with two little girls and went to visit the University of Alberta Botanic Garden. And Christy starts out her article this way. Every summer, I tell my husband, hey, we should visit the University of Alberta Botanic Garden. But several summers have passed, and we just haven't made the trip out to Devon. After all, it is just a garden, and we've got plenty of green space in Edmonton. Could it really be worth the drive? With our options for things to do being pretty limited right now and having exhausted nearly every playground and park in the city, or so it seems, we decided recently that we were finally going to visit. We drove past farms and fields to arrive at the University of Alberta Botanic Garden for our visit. And as we pulled into the parking lot, I was already intrigued. Isn't that fantastic? Well, what I love about this post is that it echoes what I hear so often from many of my friends and family members all over the world who decide to take time out of their busy lives to go and visit a botanic garden. And then once they do, they ask themselves, why did we wait so long? Now, what's really cool about this post is that we get to tag along with Christy and her adorable family as they explore this garden, and let me tell you, there's a lot to see. Christy includes wonderful pictures, and she even includes a wonderful video of her daughters playing in a fountain. And I thought that it was also very clever that the Botanic Garden is offering these little brunch boxes that you can order ahead so that you can have a little picnic in the garden. And that's just what Christy did with her family. And they even added in these little mimosa kits. They're so sweet. You get a little champagne flute with a bottle of champagne and a little bit of orange juice. And it looks fantastic. I mean, mimosas in the grass. What could be better? Such a great idea. And isn't that a wonderful way to kick off the month of June? So if you decide to go to a botanic garden, call ahead and see what they're doing to make the botanic garden more friendly, especially as we're coming out of this pandemic. All right, now if you would like to go ahead and check out this post, our enchanted botanic garden experience over at Family Fun Edmonton, all you need to do is head on over to the listener community on Facebook, our little Facebook group, and then head on up to the magnifying glass at the top of the page, search for the word botanic, and Christy's post will pop right up. Now, if you're not in the group, don't worry about it. You can join at any time. You have a standing invitation. The next time you're on Facebook, head on up to the search bar where you're going to look for your old lost friend and instead find your new friends in the Daily Gardener community. Search for those 3 words, answer a few questions, and then request to join. It's just that simple. I look forward to meeting you and your garden in the group. All right, before we head on into today's botanical history, I wanted to take a second and share this adorable poem. It was written by Annette Wynne, and it's called Why Was June Made? Now, this is my personal favorite poem for the month of June. And before I read it to you, I just wanted to share a little bit with you about Annette. Because Annette is like so many people that I research. She's someone that contributed something to the world of gardening, and yet her information, her birthday, and her death day have been lost to time. So now what I do for people like this that I stumble across when I'm doing my research for the show is I head on over to Ancestry.com and I actually create a tree for them. And lo and behold, I did find a birth year for Annette. She was born in 1883 in New York, but I don't have a date or a month. But I was successful in finding out the day that she died, and she died on July 14th in 1952. And from the records, I know that she wrote children's poems. I discovered that she was a teacher in New York, that she'd been unhappily married. She was from the Bronx. She had 3 sisters and 1 brother, and she wrote 2 whole books of poetry for children. And I'm sure that this poem, Why Was June Made, is probably from one of those 2 very old books. In any case, here's Annette's little poem called Why Was June Made? Why was June made? Can you guess? June was made for happiness. Even the trees know this, and the breeze that loves to play outside all day. Little happy daisy faces show it in the meadow places, and they call out when I pass, stay and play here in the grass. June was made for happy things, boats and flowers, stars and wings, not for wind and stress. June was made for happiness. Isn't that sweet? It's time for today's botanical history. Here's botanical history for today, June 1st. Today is the birthday of the gardener and author Richard Irwin Lynch, who was born on this day, June 1st, in 1850. Richard learned to garden from his father, who was classically trained at Kew. By the time he was 17, Richard had followed in his father's footsteps, and he too worked at Kew Gardens, starting with herbaceous perennials before moving into tropicals. And I love knowing that because we get a little sense of the career path that was available to young gardeners as they started out at Kew in the mid-1870s. Enthusiastic and driven, Richard ended up becoming the curator of the Cambridge University Botanic Garden when he was 30 years old. During his 4 decades in the position, Richard transformed and elevated the garden by expanding and diversifying the garden's collections through swaps and hybridizing. In 1904, Richard published his masterpiece, The Book of the Iris, a book dedicated to the culture and identification of irises. Now, the iris is the birth flower for the month of February and the state flower of Tennessee. The iris has been a symbol of royalty and power, and the fleur-de-lis represents the iris. And here's a heads up to gardeners. If you're growing iris without success, remember that irises need full sun to bloom their best. And if they don't get enough sun, they will not bloom. The iris fragrance is found in the roots, and it's used for perfume. Now, historically, iris root extract has been applied to the face to remove freckles. Who knew? I guess Mom never put any iris root extract on my nose. And it's on this day, June 1st, in 1837, that the American writer and gardener Edith Wharton had a heart attack while staying at the country estate of her friend and co-author of their book, The Decoration of Houses. And we're talking about the architect Ogden Codman. Now, sadly, this event became the first of 3 heart attacks for Edith. She died on August 11th of that very year and was buried at Versailles. Edith wrote many popular admonitions. My favorite one is this one. She wrote, "There are 2 ways of spreading light, to be the candle or the mirror that reflects it." And she also wrote, "Beware of monotony. It's the mother of all deadly sins." And she also wrote, "If only we'd stop trying to be happy, we could have a pretty good time." Edith's childhood in Europe afforded her a chance to see the great gardens of Italy and France. And as an adult, she became a fan of the famous garden designer Gertrude Jekyll. In 1904, in a departure from her standard storytelling, Edith published a major gardening book. It was called Italian Villas and Their Gardens, with pictures by Maxfield Parrish. Edith thought gardens should be a series of outdoor rooms, and she wrote, "In the blending of different elements, the subtle transition from the fixed and formal lines of art to the shifting and irregular lines of nature, and lastly, in convenience and livableness of the garden, lies the fundamental secret of the old garden magic." Recognizing the grandness of Italian villas, Edith wrote, "The Italian garden does not exist for its flowers. Its flowers exist for it." Edith had her own wonderful estate for a period of time. It was called the Mount, and it was built in 1920, and Edith used it as her summer country estate. Tucked in Lynch, Massachusetts, the Mount was built on a high ledge, and from the terrace, Edith could look down over her property and see her flower gardens, which she herself designed. There's a large French flower garden, a sunken Italian or walled garden, which makes sense now that we know about her book, a lime walk with 48 linden trees. That was something to see. And then enormous grass steps. She was ahead of her time. Well, when she spent time at the Mount, Edith wrote The House of Mirth. And in that story, Edith wrote about having fresh flowers, and her character, who's about to face financial ruin, says to her mother, "I really think we might afford a few fresh flowers for luncheon, just some jonquils or lilies of the valley." Of course. Well, in terms of her talent, Edith felt that she was much better in the garden than she was as a writer. Speaking of garden design, Edith's niece was the garden designer Beatrix Jones Farrand. Edith once wrote to a friend, "I'm a better landscape gardener than a novelist, and this place, the Mount, every line of which is my own work, far surpasses the House of Mirth." Sadly, Edith's time at the Mount was short-lived as her marriage ended 9 years later, and she was forced to sell the place. In her story called The Line of Least Resistance, Edith wrote from the perspective of a husband who had financed elaborate gardens. You can about imagine what he thought. Here's what she wrote from his point of view. "The lawn looked expensive as a velvet carpet woven in one piece. The flower borders contained only exotics. A marble nymph smiled at him from the terrace, but But he knew how much nymphs cost, and he was not sure they were worth the price. Beyond the shrubberies, he caught a glimpse of domed glass. His greenhouses were the finest in Newport. But since he neither ate fruit nor wore orchids, they yielded, at best, an indirect satisfaction. In 1920, toward the end of her career, Edith wrote her Pulitzer Prize-winning masterpiece, The Age of Innocence, becoming the first female to win the award in her category. In 1993, Edith's book was the basis for a movie with the same title, The Age of Innocence, and it featured a young Michelle Pfeiffer and Daniel Day-Lewis. In the book, Edith described a neglected garden. She wrote, "There was a patch of lawn before it had relapsed into a hayfield, but to the left, an overgrown box garden full of dahlias and rusty rose bushes encircled a ghostly summer house of trellis work that had once been white, surmounted by a wooden cupid who had lost his bow and arrow but continued to take ineffectual aim." In terms of her personal preferences, Edith loved reliable bloomers like lilies, hydrangeas, delphinium, cleome, my favorite, and dahlias. And regarding peonies, she once described them as having, quote, "jolly round-faced blooms." It's time for today's Unearthed Words. Today's Unearthed Words come to us from the American novelist, the author of the Book of Ruth, and the winner of the PEN/Hemingway Award for First Fiction, Jane Hamilton. This is an excerpt about the first day of June from her book, A Map of the World, which became a New York Times Notable Book of the Year back in 1999. The last rain had come at the beginning of April, and now at the 1st of June, all but the hardiest mosquitoes had left their papery skins in the grass. It was already 7 o'clock in the morning, long past time to close windows and doors and trap what was left of the night air, slightly cooler only by virtue of the dark. The dust on the gravel had just enough energy to drift a short distance and then collapse on the flower beds. The sun had a white cast, as if shade and shadow, any flicker of nuance, had been burned out by its own fierce center. There would be no late afternoon gold, no pale early morning yellow, no flaming orange at sunset. If the plants had vocal cords, they would sing their holy dirges like slaves. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, Practical Houseplant Book by Zia Alloway and Fran Bailey. This book came out in 2018, and the subtitle is Choose Well, Display Creatively, Nurture and Maintain 175 Plant Profiles. In this book, Zia and Fran share a dozen inspiring projects with nearly 200 in-depth plant profiles, along with expert guidance to help you cultivate and care for your houseplants. The 12 inspiring plant projects include a desert scape, an air plant stand and a macrame hanger, an open bottle terrarium, a willow climbing frame, a succulent wreath. I have one that I'm working on right this week with my student gardeners, a kokedama fern, a moth picture frame, a dry terrarium, a wood-mounted orchid, which sounds amazing, a living space divider, and a propagation shelf. This book is 224 pages of houseplant projects, profiles, and guidance. You can get a copy of Practical Houseplant Book by Zia Alloway and Fran Bailey and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for around $3. Finally, here's something sweet to revive the little botanic spark in your heart. Today is the birthday of the Australian novelist and gardener Colleen McCulloch, who was born on this day, June 1st, in 1937. Colleen was exceptionally bright. Born and raised in Australia, she worked at Yale as a neurophysiologist for $10,000 a year. Her friends called her Call. During her spare time, she wrote her first breakthrough novel, Tim, a story about a middle-aged widow who has a relationship with her young, handsome, and developmentally disabled gardener. And if you remember, Tim became a movie starring Mel Gibson. But it was her next novel that would end up changing Colleen's life. The Thornbirds, the Australian love story between a Catholic priest and a young woman named Maggie Cleary. In The Thornbirds, Colleen wrote, "There's a story, a legend, about a bird that sings just once in its life. From the moment it leaves its nest, it searches for a thorn tree and never rests until it's found one. And then it sings, more sweetly than any other creature on the face of the earth. And singing, it impales itself on the longest, sharpest thorn. But as it dies, it rises above its own agony to outsing the lark and the nightingale. The thornbird pays with its life for just one song, but the whole world stills to listen, and God in his heaven smiles." The Thornbirds sold 30 million copies, becoming a blockbusting TV miniseries and allowing Colleen the chance to follow her heart and desire for privacy. By 1979, Colleen bought a 10-hectare property on Norfolk Island, a small island outpost of Australia between New Zealand and New Caledonia, and a place that she would call home for the rest of her life. A daughter of Australia, Colleen's home country adored her, and they declared her a national treasure in 1997. Now, Colleen died in 2015, but today her garden and home, complete with a fern room, is now open for tours. Now, as luck would have it, the gardener and garden broadcast personality Graham Ross wrote about meeting Colleen. He went to see her with his wife, and then he shared his comments on Facebook a few years back. He wrote, "When we first met Colleen McCulloch in her garden, it was like meeting an old friend. It's a long drive through the Kentia palm plantation to find the beautiful 2-story weatherboard home. There was no greeting party of minders, no official anything, just a hearty good day. Would you like a cup of tea?" Followed by, "Let's look at the garden, such as it is." Well, the garden was entirely the domain and responsibility of her Persian cat Shady, who would roll in Sweet Alice, or Alyssum, gather seeds in her long fur, and then roll around elsewhere in the dirt, distributing the seeds. It was the largest planting of Sweet Alice we'd ever seen. In the center of the garden was a magnificent glass screen by a woman artist who also had a copy of the work, according to Colleen, hanging in Parliament House. But it was her finale, her coup de grace, that remains with us after the long chat and yarning. We had recently published our first major text called Our World of Gardening with Simon & Schuster, and we took a copy for her as a sign of our appreciation for her time. What happened next remains with us as the true essence of Colleen McCulloch. She was enormously grateful for our book, and at first we thought overly so, but then she left the room after telling us of her gratitude. 10 minutes later, she returned with a copy of every book she'd written, from Tim to the Roman series. Then she proceeded to autograph and include a personal message in every book. It was a hugely generous gesture and followed up with the amazing statement, "You are the first authors to ever offer me a copy of their book." A few photographs for the record were taken, and we left with over a dozen books under our arms and a fond memory that remains fresh today. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener, and remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day. The Daily Gardener is produced in lovely Maple Grove and Wyoming, Minnesota. If you want to read today's show notes, just head on over to thedailygardener.org. And while you're there, be sure to sign up for my free Friday newsletter. And don't forget that you have a standing invitation to join the free Facebook group for listeners of the show. Just search for Daily Gardener Community the next time you're on Facebook and request to join. Last but not least, you can always get in touch by emailing me at jennifer@thedailygardener.org. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and as always, have a great day in the garden, and we'll see you tomorrow. Hi there, and welcome to The Daily Gardener, a podcast about gardening, botanical history, and literature. I'm your host. Let's try it again. Hi there, and welcome to The Daily Gardener, a podcast about gardening, botanical history, and literature. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and today is May. Oh my gosh, you're living in a time warp. It's official. Here we go. Just head on up to the search bar where you're going to search for your old Aunt Edith, or maybe a nephew.